My name is Julia Scott. I'm 38 years old, a software engineer living in Austin, Texas, and until recently, I believed I had a life that would carry me gently into old age. I never imagined I'd be telling this story, not for sympathy, not for validation, but because some wounds are too heavy to carry alone, and silence nearly crushed me. My life used to be full, a stable career, a warm home filled with laughter, and most importantly, a husband I loved more deeply than I knew words could hold. Ethan Scott wasn't just my husband, he was my anchor. We met when I was 24, both of us hiding in a small cafe downtown, me wrestling with a stubborn block of code, him flipping through pediatric case notes during a rare break from the hospital. One conversation turned into hours. Hours turned into years. 3 years later, we married in a simple ceremony because Ethan never cared for grandeur. All he wanted was peace, a home to return to after long shifts, a family to love. Ethan was a pediatrician, and not the distant kind. He stayed overnight beside frightened children. He held shaking hands. He whispered reassurance when needles loomed. He carried the weight of other people's pain without complaint. I used to watch him sleep after those shifts, his face soft with exhaustion, and think, how did I get so lucky? We had 2 daughters. Lily, 7 now, bright, imaginative, always drawing stories that spilled beyond the page. And Sophie, 5, fearless, energetic, my little storm. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Dinners together, weekend picnics, bedtime stories read twice because Sophie always demanded again. Then 2 years ago, everything began to slip. Ethan started coming home drained in a way that scared me. Not just tired, empty. His smile lingered a fraction too long, like he was trying to convince himself. Then one evening, he collapsed. The ambulance lights painted our kitchen red and blue as I held his hand, begging him to stay awake. 15 minutes later, a doctor pulled me aside. Your husband has late-stage pancreatic cancer. The words didn't feel real. Days, weeks, maybe. I would have sold my soul for a miracle. When Ethan was admitted, I reached out to my family. I needed help. More than that, I wanted Ethan to feel surrounded by people who loved him. My mother replied quickly, concerned, predictable. My half-brother Brandon sent only this. He's going soon. You should start preparing for the funeral. I stared at the screen, my breath hitching. I was used to Brandon's coldness. But this was something else. I didn't know then that this message was only the beginning. That grief would not be my greatest enemy, and that the people I thought were family would soon show me exactly who they were. If you asked me back then why I kept trying with my mother and Brandon, I would have given you the answer I'd repeated for years. Because they're family. But the truth was uglier. I kept trying because Ethan believed in people the way doctors believe in recovery. Like kindness could coax a damaged thing back to life. Even when it hurt him. Even when it drained us. Especially when it drained us. Brandon was my half-brother, technically. We shared the same mother, but we didn't share the same childhood. Not even close. My mom divorced my dad when I was 2. My father never lived with us, but he was present. Quiet. Consistent. He covered my college tuition. Helped me land my first internship. He didn't say much, but his actions were a language I learned to trust. Brandon didn't have that. His father drifted in and out of his life like a bad signal, always static, never stability. And because of that, my mother carried guilt like it was a second spine. She compensated for Brandon with obsession. If Brandon wanted something, she called it a need. If Brandon acted out, she called it pain. If Brandon hurt someone, she called it misunderstood. And me? I was the daughter who was strong enough to handle it. The one expected to understand, to bend, to forgive. By the time I was an adult, I didn't even question the imbalance. I just lived inside it. Ethan saw it long before I admitted it. The first time he met Brandon, Brandon shook his hand like he was doing Ethan a favor. He looked Ethan up and down, then glanced at me with that familiar half smirk. Must be nice, Brandon said like it was a joke. Some people get all the luck. Ethan smiled politely. But later that night, when we were brushing our teeth, he said softly, he doesn't see you as his sister, Jules. I remember freezing with toothpaste in my mouth. What do you mean? Ethan rinsed his mouth, wiped the sink, and met my eyes in the mirror. He sees you as proof that life was fair to you and unfair to him, and he's going to spend his whole life trying to balance that scale. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend Brandon, or at least defend the idea that family had to mean something. But Ethan didn't push. He just kissed my forehead and whispered, we'll be kind anyway. And so we were. God, we were. The car Brandon drove, Ethan and I bought it. Brandon would call it a hand-me-down to his friends, even though it was better than anything we owned at the time. The house he lived in, technically, legally, it was ours. Ethan insisted. Brandon had been struggling, he said. He needed stability. Everyone deserved a place to call home. So we helped. We didn't charge rent. We covered repairs. We paid property taxes. We even covered utilities more than once when Brandon forgot. And every single month, we transferred $2,000 to Brandon and my mother. Not because we were rich. Because Ethan couldn't stand the thought of them drowning while we had air. My mother never said thank you. She would simply call it helping Brandon, like the money came from the sky. Not from our overtime hours and skipped vacations. Brandon never said thank you either. He acted like I owed it. Like my existence had robbed him of something he deserved. The deeper Ethan got into his illness, the more Brandon's entitlement sharpened like a blade. A few months before Ethan passed, Brandon came over unannounced. I remember the way he walked into our living room, not like a guest, not like family, like an owner inspecting property. He sat on our couch, kicked one ankle over his knee, and said casually, "Hey, it's about time you transfer that house to me." I blinked, waiting for the punchline. He kept going. "It doesn't feel right living in a place that's technically yours. Like, I'm just borrowing it. If you're really giving it to me, you should make it official." I felt my mouth open, then close again. My mind was a hot, buzzing noise. Borrowing it? As if it hadn't been years. As if he hadn't been living there, throwing parties, bringing girlfriends, making renovations I never approved, all while I paid for the foundation beneath his feet. Ethan was sitting beside me, thinner than he should have been, his face pale. I watched him inhale carefully, as if even breathing was expensive now. I expected Ethan to say something, to snap, but he didn't. He reached over and placed his hand on mine, giving it that gentle squeeze that always meant, "Please, not now, not like this." So I swallowed my anger the way I'd been swallowing it my whole life. I forced a calm voice and said, "Let's talk about that later." Brandon's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward slightly. "Later when?" he asked. "Because I'm not gonna lie, Julia. It feels like you like having control, like you like reminding me it's yours." Control? I was so stunned I almost laughed. The only control I'd ever had in this relationship was deciding how far I let Brandon take me before I broke. And I was dangerously close to breaking. But Ethan's fingers tightened around mine again, and I didn't explode. Brandon left that day with a satisfied look, like he'd planted something. And he had. Because after that conversation, the resentment in him didn't simmer quietly anymore. It started to boil. When Ethan got hospitalized, I sent the message in our family group chat. I asked them to visit, to show up, to be family for once. My mother replied quickly, "Oh, honey, I'm so worried. I'll come as soon as I can." But Brandon's message was still burned into my brain like a scar. "He's going soon. Start preparing for the funeral. No condolences. No, I'm sorry. No, how are you holding up?" Just a cold statement, like Ethan's life was a schedule inconvenience. I remember sitting in a chair in the hospital hallway afterward, staring at my phone. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was rage. And grief. And something else, something sharp and ugly. A realization forming like thunder behind my ribs. Brandon doesn't hate Ethan. Brandon hates me. Because Ethan had always been my shield. My peace. My proof that even if my family didn't value me, someone did. And now, as Ethan lay behind that hospital door, fading, Brandon was already counting what he could take when the light went out. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to think grief was making me paranoid. But then my phone buzzed again. "Dad." It was my father calling. I answered with a voice that didn't sound like mine. "Julia, Nancy and I just stopped by your house. No one was there. Where are you?" Nancy was my stepmother. My dad, David Carter, wasn't the kind of man who hugged too long or cried in public. But when he cared, you felt it like a weight on your shoulder, steady, unmovable. I swallowed hard. "Ethan's in the hospital, Dad," I whispered. "It's not looking good." There was no pause, no hesitation. "We're coming right now," he said. Less than 20 minutes later, I saw them walking down the corridor like a lifeline. My father pulled me into a firm hug, strong enough to hold me up, gentle enough not to break me. Nancy touched my shoulder, her eyes already glossy. "Julia," she said softly, "you can't do everything alone." And for the first time in weeks, my chest loosened just enough to breathe. Dad's voice was low, solid. "Nancy and I will take care of Lily and Sophie while Ethan is here. We'll bring them to visit. We'll do whatever you need." I tried to refuse out of instinct, out of pride, out of habit. But then I thought of my daughters. so small, so bright, trying to understand why Daddy was disappearing behind machines and whispered conversations. And I nodded, because I was running out of strength. Lily and Sophie were heartbreakingly perceptive. The first time Dad walked into Ethan's hospital room, Lily ran to him and hugged his leg. "Grandpa," she said, eyes wide, "Daddy's sick, but he's going to get better, right?" Dad knelt, brushed her hair back, and smiled the way only grandparents can. Steady, convincing. "Of course, my little princess," he said. "Daddy's brave, and he feels better when you're here." Sophie toddled forward, clutching a crumpled drawing. It was our family. Stick figures, big smiles, a sun in the corner. She held it up proudly. "For Daddy," she declared. Ethan's eyes softened. He lifted his shaky hand and touched the paper like it was sacred. And I had to look away before I started sobbing in front of my girls. Because the truth was, I didn't know if he would get better. I just knew that day by day, the hospital room felt colder, the air felt heavier. And somewhere out there, in the quiet spaces between my mother's empty promises and Brandon's cruel messages, something inside me was preparing for war. I didn't know it yet, but soon, grief wouldn't be the worst pain I'd endure. Not even close. Ethan lasted less than 8 weeks after he was admitted. 8 weeks of doctors speaking in lowered voices. 8 weeks of machines beeping like they were counting down something I didn't want to face. 8 weeks of me sleeping in a chair, my back aching, my fingers permanently curled around his hand as if letting go would mean losing him faster. I didn't eat much, didn't sleep much. I just stayed. Every day felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, hoping the ground wouldn't give way. My father and Nancy brought Lily and Sophie to see Ethan every single day. Lily, only 5 then, moved through that hospital room like glass might shatter if she breathed too hard. She would carefully place her drawings on the bed. "Daddy, I drew us at the park," she'd say softly. "Daddy says we'll go again when you're better." Ethan barely had the strength to answer, but he always smiled, always nodded. Sophie didn't understand enough to be careful. She understood hugs. She'd climb onto the bed, wrap her tiny arms around his chest, and whisper, "Daddy, don't sleep so long. Wake up and play with me." I saw tears slip from Ethan's eyes more than once when she said that. I wanted to scream, to beg the universe, to promise my girls things I knew I couldn't keep. But I didn't, because Ethan deserved truth, not lies dressed as hope. The night before he passed, after Lily and Sophie had gone home, Ethan opened his eyes and searched the room until he found me. I leaned in immediately, my heart racing. "Jules," he whispered. His voice was so weak I had to bring my ear to his lips. "You have to promise me something." I nodded, tears blurring everything. "Anything," he swallowed, struggling for air. "No matter what happens, don't let anger consume you. You still have your whole life ahead of you, and our girls, they need you." I knew what he meant. He knew me too well. He knew that without him, I might drown in bitterness toward my family, toward the world, toward myself. I nodded again, even though my chest felt like it was splitting open. "I promise," I whispered. I don't know if he believed me. Ethan smiled faintly, then his eyes fluttered shut. He never opened them again. The next day is a blur. A doctor shaking my shoulder, words I couldn't hear, Lily sobbing into my legs, asking where Daddy was, Sophie whispering through tears, "Daddy's sleeping too long." I remember staring at the hospital bed after they took him away. Cold, empty. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment everything ends. I was wrong. Something else was waiting. After the paperwork, after the nurses, after the world kept moving like it hadn't just shattered me, I stepped outside the hospital. The sky over Austin was painfully blue. I sent one message in the family group chat. "Ethan passed away this morning. The funeral will be on Saturday at 11 a.m. at St. Mary's Church. I hope you'll come say your goodbyes." I didn't expect comfort. I didn't expect tears. I expected something human. My mother read the message. No response. 1 minute passed. Then 5. Then 10. The silence felt deliberate. Finally, Brandon replied. "Oh, but Saturday is my birthday party. I already invited everyone over at 11. I stared at the screen, convinced my grief had scrambled my brain. I read it again. And again. No condolences. No apology. Just a scheduling conflict. My mother responded seconds later. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry, but I already promised to help Brandon with his birthday party. Can you move the funeral to another day?" I felt something inside me go completely still, like a glass dropped from a great height. I called her immediately. "What the hell are you saying?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Are you seriously asking me to move my husband's funeral for a birthday party?" She sighed. "Julia, don't get so worked up. Brandon has been planning this for a month. Invitations are already sent." And you think I can just cancel my husband's funeral? I spat. Do you hear yourself? That's not what I meant, she said quickly, then hesitated. You know how Brandon is. If the funeral happens the same day, he'll be upset. He wants his birthday to be a happy occasion. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. So Brandon's feelings matter more than the fact that I just lost my husband? Silence. Then, softly, well, he's had a harder life than you. That was it. Years of swallowing it. Years of excusing it. Years of being the understanding daughter. Gone. Fine, I said coldly. You and Brandon enjoy your party. Don't bother coming to Ethan's funeral. I don't need your fake sympathy. Julia, I'm your mother. No, I cut her off. A real mother would never put one child's birthday over another child's grief. I hung up. I thought that was rock bottom. Then the hospital doors opened. My father walked in with Nancy, and behind them, Lily and Sophie. Lily ran to me immediately. Daddy's here, right? She asked. Grandpa said Daddy was here. Sophie tugged at my shirt, holding up a new drawing. Daddy awake yet? I dropped to my knees and pulled them into my arms. Daddy isn't here anymore, my loves, I said, my voice hoarse. Daddy became an angel. Lily frowned. Where's heaven? I pointed to the sky. Sophie followed my finger, searching the clouds. When Daddy coming home? She asked. I closed my eyes. One day he'll visit you, I whispered. But for now, he's watching over us. Saturday came. At 11 a.m., I stood inside the funeral home, staring at Ethan's portrait. He was smiling in it. The same gentle smile that used to calm entire rooms. Relatives filled the space quietly. Whispers floated. I can't believe Brandon is still having a party today. That's cruel. They chose the funeral. Of course they did. No one from my family attended Brandon's party. Everyone who mattered was here. Then my phone vibrated. Family group chat. Brandon had sent a video. I opened it and my blood turned to ice. There he was, laughing, champagne glass raised, EDM music blasting, confetti exploding as a massive cake rolled in. He was celebrating. In the house I owned. While my husband lay in a casket, something inside me snapped, clean and final. I unlocked my phone and dialed 911. I'd like to report an unauthorized party, I said calmly. Someone is trespassing in my house. I gave the address. If Brandon wanted a birthday, he'd never forget. I was done giving him gifts. I didn't feel guilty. That was the strangest part. As I stood outside the funeral home, the soft murmur of condolences drifting through the doors behind me, my hands were steady. My heart was shattered, but my mind had never been clearer. For years, I had mistaken endurance for virtue. I had called silence peace. I had called sacrifice love. And I had called exploitation family. 20 minutes after I made the call, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long second, then answered. Her voice exploded through the speaker. Julia, what the hell did you do? I pulled the phone away slightly, letting her scream burn itself out. What are you talking about? I asked, my tone eerily calm. Don't play dumb, she shrieked. The police are here. You called the cops on Brandon, on his birthday. Do you have any idea how humiliated he is right now? Humiliated. That was the word she chose. I let out a short, bitter laugh. You're worried about him being humiliated, I said slowly, but not about the fact that I'm burying my husband? You went too far, she snapped. He's your brother. In the background, I heard another voice, loud, furious, unhinged. You absolute piece of... Brandon screamed. What kind of sister does this to her own family? I clenched my jaw. You're celebrating in my house, I said coldly, on the day of my husband's funeral. You've always had everything handed to you, Brandon shouted. I just wanted one day for myself. One day, I repeated. Ethan died, Brandon. Am I not allowed even a single day to say goodbye? Silence, just for a moment. Then my mother spoke again. Quieter now, sharper. You've made a big mistake. No, I said. The only mistake I made was waiting this long. I hung up. The party ended shortly after that. Guests scattered. Music died. Laughter evaporated. By early afternoon, I dropped Lily and Sophie off with my father and drove straight to the police station. They'd asked me to come in and give a statement. Inside the waiting area, my mother and Brandon sat side by side. They weren't yelling now. They looked small. My mother stood when she saw me, her voice suddenly soft, carefully controlled. Julia, you're here. What did you tell the police? I crossed my arms. The truth, I said, that the house belongs to me, and Brandon has been living there without permission. Brandon shot to his feet. You can't do this, he yelled. I've lived there for years. I met his glare without flinching. What lease? I asked calmly. What utility bills? What paperwork proves it's yours? His mouth opened, then closed. My mother stepped forward, desperation creeping in. Julia, please, we're family. I laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was hollow. Family? I asked. Where was family when I was burying my husband while you were popping champagne? She had no answer. I took a deep breath, my voice steady. I won't press charges, but I have conditions. Their heads lifted instantly. One, I said, holding up a finger, you leave my house immediately. Brandon swallowed hard. Two, no more money, no more support, no car, no help, ever again. My mother's face drained of color. And three, I said quietly, you are no longer my family. The officers exchanged looks. One of them, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, raised an eyebrow. Let me get this straight, he said slowly. Your husband died, and your family threw a birthday party at the same time? A younger female officer shook her head in disbelief. That's a new low. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out. And for the first time since Ethan died, I felt free. More than 2 years have passed since that day. Time didn't heal everything, but it softened the sharpest edges. It taught me how to breathe again, without feeling like I was betraying Ethan's memory. Lily is 7 now. She reads before bed every night, curled up with a book almost as thick as she is. She still draws, but her stories have grown more complex. Families that survive storms, heroes who protect younger siblings. Sophie is 5, still fearless, still loud, still convinced she can outrun anyone, including me. She twirls spaghetti noodles like it's an Olympic sport and insists Ethan is watching from the clouds. And maybe he is. My father and Nancy never left our side, not once. They showed up for school events, doctor appointments, late-night tears, and early morning chaos. They never tried to replace Ethan. They simply loved my daughters with a steadiness that healed in quiet ways. As for my mother, she tried. Texts, calls, letters left in my mailbox. Once, she even showed up at my door, standing there with the same familiar look of expectation, as if time alone should have erased everything. I didn't answer, not because I was angry, but because I was done. Brandon disappeared from my life entirely after that day. Without a free house, he had to move. Without monthly support, he had to fend for himself. I heard, through distant relatives, that he sold the car we once bought him just to get by. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt nothing. He had exhausted every ounce of empathy I had. Then yesterday, as I was picking Lily and Sophie up from school, my phone rang. Mom. I let it ring. A few minutes later, a message came through. Julia, please, I'm begging you. Brandon is in the hospital. The doctors say he doesn't have much time. No matter what happened, he's still your brother. Please help him. I stared at the message for a long time. There was a version of me, an older version, a smaller version, that would have rushed to the hospital out of obligation, out of guilt, out of the lie that blood outweighs behavior. But that woman died the same day Ethan did. I deleted the message. Then I set my phone down and turned to my daughters. So, I said, forcing a smile, what's for dinner tonight, pizza or spaghetti? Lily clapped. Pizza, extra cheese! Sophie shook her head violently. No, spaghetti. I want to twirl it like Daddy. I laughed, really laughed, and pulled them both into my arms. Somewhere my mother was desperate. Somewhere Brandon lay in a hospital bed, facing the consequences of a lifetime of entitlement. And I felt no guilt, only clarity. I chose the people who chose me. I cut ties with those who turned their backs when I needed them most. And I moved forward, not in anger, but in peace. But I know not everyone would make the same choice. So let me ask you, if you were me, would you forgive Brandon? Would you answer my mother's plea? Or would you do what I did and protect the life you fought so hard to rebuild? Tell me in the comments. And if stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening to my story.